now. And we are actually live. That's the best part. So straight from Amsterdam, rainy Amsterdam today, to your home offices, small screen devices, and hopefully your big living room home office screen. This is the second edition of the Community Office Hours for the AWS provider for Terraform. My God, these titles keep getting longer. My name is Kareem Satirli. I'm a developer advocate for HashiCorp, where I focus on Terraform. And I'm joined today, once again, by Mary Kutrali and Brian Flatt. Thank you for being here today, you two.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Mary, for the folks that missed our May 18th episode, when we had the inaugural edition of the AWS provider office hours, what do you do at HashiCorp?
So I am the product manager for the Terraform AWS provider, looking after our priorities and planning what we're going to release in the provider from day to day, month to month, quarter to quarter.
Awesome. I'm going to have a couple of questions about that in a second. But first, Brian, you're a senior software engineer for the Terraform ecosystem. What do you do?
Yeah, that's right. Get to be lucky enough to be the engineering lead for the AWS provider, but also, kind of work in the ecosystem, provider ecosystem as well. So, day to day is like helping manage, Terraform provider development experience overall, not just for the AWS provider, but also, helping kind of lead the way from the engineering side of efforts on the AWS provider.
Awesome. So the Terraform provider for AWS has been releasing every week on Thursdays. I think 3.8 scheduled for today, if I'm not entirely mistaken.
That is correct.
Yes.
There are a lot of changes happening. Last time we spoke, it was 2.5 something, 2.6 maybe already. What's new with the provider?
So since May, we have, I think our last two series release was 2.7. If I'm wrong, Brian can tell me. And early in August, the first week of August, we released version 3.0, which will be this year's major release of the Terraform AWS provider. So every year we do one major release and then we release weekly and minor releases. In our major releases, we try to do all of our deprecations for the year, make any breaking changes that needed to happen from last year's 2.0 release to this year's 3.0. And then sometimes we'll release a couple of new features. So the big changes in 3.0 this year, we made some changes to the ACM resource to address some usability issues. The biggest change is that we deprecated support for Terraform 0.11. What that means is that if you're running Terraform 0.11, you can't download any of the 3.x releases going forward. You'll need to be using Terraform 0.12. We also made sure that we upgraded all of our documentation, examples, tests, etc., to 0.12 syntax. And then I think, Brian, if you want to talk about some of the technical changes in 3.0.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a pretty good summary from a high level. Some of the more deep divey things, we did kind of make the authentication of the provider a lot more in line with like how the AWS CLI works, for example. Basically automatically enabling the shared config files, so you don't have to worry about that. It also will prefer like EKS credentials ahead of like EC2 metadata credentials, etc. And other than that, there's, like Mary said, just a bunch of usually generally pretty small deprecations and removals and things like that. So, but we can absolutely talk about specifics if you all want.
There's a couple of things I want to touch upon. One thing that I want to call out is, and Mary, you mentioned that you work on the roadmap. We should probably share a link to that in the live chat. The roadmap is a pretty good place to see what's coming up for the provider. And if you haven't seen it, I'm always impressed by seeing how much work goes into that and how clear it really is. There's good stuff coming our way.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about our roadmap. Every quarter, well, let's say every 3 months, but every quarter for us, we publish our roadmap on GitHub in the top level in the provider. You can find it at Terraform provider AWS/roadmap. And our goal with publishing our roadmap is to give our community clarity about what we're working on. We recognize that sort of the breadth of the provider is very large. And if you're coming just to see us on GitHub, it might be hard to figure out what we're working on. And so our goal is to get a mix of new service areas in the AWS provider, larger enhancements for core services in the provider. We also publish our core services, but from a high level, those are things like compute, containers, databases, messaging queues, and serverless areas. And then we also take on technical debt themes every quarter. This gives our engineering team time to work on sort of some of the trickier issues in our provider, and also helps us to provide a better user experience for folks either contributing or coming to use the provider. So some of the highlights this quarter, which were August to October for us, new service areas we're thinking about, Event Bridge and Image Builder. Those are two things that come from our top issues on the repository. So looking at the things that are really important to our community and then scheduling those each quarter to make sure that we're meeting the needs of folks using the provider. We're also currently working on and have finished some of the enhancements we've taken on. So things like elastic IPs for AWS Transfer Server, point-in-time restore support for RDS instances, and RDS proxy support. This quarter, we've also chosen to highlight that we've been working on our federal, gap analysis and federal testing. And so making sure that the AWS provider is going to work in GovCloud and secret environments as well. And then Brian, is there anything you want to highlight from this quarter's roadmap?
Yeah, absolutely. The RDS DB proxy support is very exciting. That's almost finished. The Route 53 cross account authorization support, that actually landed a few weeks ago. So that's out there, and we've heard good things, but please provide feedback if you see anything. And transfer user home directory mappings, that was like a big ask, and that one's, I believe, going out this week. So pretty exciting stuff.
There's a lot of stuff happening. I mean, just with 3.8, having a data source for all the database engine versions and things that don't self-identify as database, but still kind of are, that's really nice. Just being able to pull that into your Terraform. We've been using that to actually, and I hate to say this, to build YAML files from the templates. So in the dropdowns, you could then select what kind of version you get. All fed by Terraform. Is it the best use of that resource? I'm 100% certain it is not. So please, if you have a better use, definitely let us know, because I would like to see something cooler with it than building YAML files. But yeah, we're sharing the link to the changelog for you because there's a lot of stuff happening. If you look at the weekly releases, I'm amazed by how much the AWS provider team puts out every week in terms of new features, new data sources, bug fixes. How many people are on the team?
So me, an engineering manager, and then 3 engineers, including Brian.
We also have a few service maintainers as well that help us out. Kit and Ilya, you may see them around.
These are definitely good folks to have. I see internally the activity that is happening, and the review speed has definitely gone up. And that's one of the points that I think is worth highlighting. Sometimes we have contributions, and I know that's the same for the AWS provider, that land, that have all the code attached, possibly even unit tests, and it's nice having that, right? But sometimes it takes a while. And we know that there's a good reason for it, but not everyone in the community might know. So I'm wondering, Mary, Brian, could one of you share what the, let's call it the life cycle of a PR is?
So there are two ways PRs get to us for review. One of them is from folks who have an enterprise agreement or a contract with HashiCorp. Will oftentimes highlight PRs in support tickets or in their monthly check-ins with TAMs or their SEs. Those usually come to me directly, and then I'll communicate with Brian and our engineering manager to determine where those fit in our weekly or monthly priorities. The other way is more likely that Brian or one of the engineers will see it. Well, if someone, whether it's a service maintainer, a customer, someone from the community makes a pull request related either to the roadmap, it's a new bug, it's a new pull request, and Brian or one of the engineers will review it. And then I'll let Brian talk a little bit about what happens once a PR makes it to the review cycle.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, so, when we get a bunch of contributions, if you're fortunate or unfortunate enough to subscribe to the GitHub and watch the repo, it can be a little busy. But in general, there's certain things that we're looking out for when we first see pull requests, and it's, that's the whole, is there documentation, is there testing, and that sort of fun business. But, in general, like, we find that a lot of the contributions are, pretty good just from the get-go. It's just a matter of, finding the time from the engineering side just to make sure that, when we're adding functionality, that we can make sure that, it's bug-free as possible. And also, getting in there and saying, okay, making sure that the workflow will make sense in Terraform as well. And sometimes we also get like little things like making sure it lines up with the AWS APIs and that sort of stuff, just to make sure that the user experience is consistent, whether you're using the AWS CLI or Terraform AWS provider or, CloudFormation and other tooling. So yeah, that's pretty much the technical side of it. From the review side, it is hard. It is hard sometimes to see like all the wonderful contributions coming in and be like, oh, we can't get through them fast enough.
Thank you for sharing that bit about how the flow actually works. I think the reason I wanted to showcase or like explain how many people are actually working on this team is because looking at the changelog, you wouldn't be able to tell it's just a handful of people, really. It's amazing how much new stuff gets added week over week and how amazing the experience has been. We've updated a couple of our modules to the 3.x provider. I think the biggest change we had was removing the region from the S3 resources. And that was it. It was very, very simple.
Yeah,
So
another fun thing about our releases is that we get, it's not only just the work that the enhancements and the bug fixes that land in the changelog, but is also seeing some of the, kind of technical debt. We have a large code base, and that requires a lot of maintenance and keeping up with the changes that are happening in the Terraform provider development ecosystem as well. So, a lot of our focus is, as a small team, is to make sure that we're being a force multipliers as much as possible when it comes to contributions and dealing with, the large code base. And, it's hard. That's not something that lands in a changelog entry, but it is something that is just occurring over time. And we're thinking about as well as like, how can we further improve the experience of, not only for the people who get the benefit when they go download the Terraform AWS provider, but also the developers as well, who are working on this code and helping us out.
It definitely is more than just a surface that the practitioners see. There's registry changes in the underlying code base to make things work better for the environments you don't normally think about. Half the people probably didn't even know that Terraform supports the Gov Cloud and the non-Gov Cloud, Gov Cloud resources. Not sure how much we can talk about that today. Pretty sure there's a good 007 bit that we can promote here. But in any case, there's a lot of good work going in. And while we wait for some community questions to come in, if you are thinking about contributing to a provider, not necessarily the AWS one, then one of the options you have is to check out HashiCorp Digital, workshops on how to build a provider. And that's for the HashiCorp provider. your very own coffee store, where you get illustrious drinks such as the Nomadicano and a couple other ones that I'm blanking on right now. We'll share a link to that as well. I think the first one is definitely sold out. There's a second one running. If there's a wait list, I highly suggest you get in on that. It's going to be a nice 90 minutes on how to learn, on how to contribute to providers and learn it from the people that actually built them. So let's see, we've got a community question from Sven asking, well, how to how to get the data source. I'm guessing this was the one that we talked about a little bit before. And while I don't have the direct link for you, Sven, the easiest place to get all the resources is in the Terraform registry. And we'll share a link to that with you in a second to make sure you can actually find it. Terraform registry has all the data sources that are currently released in there. A few of the ones that we mentioned today were for the 3.8 provider, which is not currently live, but will be later today. But at that point, you'll be able to find the data sources in the registry as well. And we'll get a link up for that as well. Also, if you're interested on how the registry works, last week we had an office hour session on that. Definitely worth checking out. There's a lot of discoverability changes. It's a lot easier to find resources, and especially with something like the AWS provider, which has hundreds of resources and I feel like the same amount of data sources. I'm sure either of you has a general number in mind. It's amazing to see how easy it is to find what you need.
Yeah, so we have close to 600 resources in the Terraform AWS provider today. So resources are not a one-to-one mapping with a single service. So services can have multiple resources. Think of resources as an atomic unit inside of a service. So an EC2 instance, an RDS instance, an RDS cluster, things like that. As far as data sources go, I think we're somewhere in the 200s. Again, not every resource has data sources, right? We're thinking about data sources as, again, things that you might need to use in other parts of the provider outside of the resource that they're at home in. And so not every resource is going to have or need that kind of property for them. But we do try to add new resources in every release, so that number is growing, super exciting. And we hope to continue to make that grow as we continue to develop the AWS provider.
600 plus, 200 plus. reInvent is coming up this year. It's going to be 3 weeks. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a dozen new services, which probably means a lot of new stuff being added to Terraform. I'm excited about that. So Brian, what was your favorite resource that got added or updated in the provider?
I think, quite honestly, the cross-account Route 53 stuff is very interesting. It was basically an API that was missing from AWS for a very long time. And it kind of prevented like you automatically to just have a Terraform configuration and make multiple account Route 53 things, the magic happen, right? And when that landed and the community was super excited and we all kind of rallied together and, you know, got that support out. So that was pretty exciting to see.
Anything that's cross-account is always amazing because it just makes it easier to build your infrastructure in a, I guess I would say, cleaner way. I mean, we've been telling people that you should think of it as building blocks, as Lego blocks. And if you're able to separate those things out by having access to things in Terraform that allow you to do things cross-account, interactions, accepting relationships and peerings, it's definitely a force multiplier. Same question for you, Mary. What's your favorite resource or data source?
I've been really happy with all of the work that we've been doing inside of RDS this year to either expand the experience or fix up some usability bugs. It's been really wonderful to talk to our users and our customers to try to understand how they're using all the things that RDS has to offer in different ways. And also, I guess, kind of all of the database ecosystem things. So looking at DynamoDB and DocsDB and all of that too, kind of learning about how those fit into our users' workflows and what features are important to them has been really interesting. And then being able to deliver incremental fixes to those, or in this case, like this quarter, larger enhancements, has been really exciting to see those then be used and change the way that folks are using or being able to interact with their database inside of AWS via Terraform.
And these interactions are wide and deep. So let's see, we have a community question on the SSM on SSM provisioners, such that we don't have to set up SSH. And provisioners are being deprecated. I think we announced that a week or two ago. Let's get a link for that up so people can actually see this. So this is important if you're using Chef, Masterless Salt, Puppet, and a couple of the other provisioners, except local exec and remote exec, then you're now using something that will be deprecated from possibly 0.14 on, which means you will want to update your workflow in a way that's more conform to Terraform. We'll share the link with you, but the easiest thing to do is to just think about what's not a provider, why am I not using a provider? And well, again, if there's no provider for the thing you're trying to do, take our workshop, build a provider. We currently have 300 plus in the registry, but there's definitely room for more. So let's see, a roadmap question, and we've shared that one. Do we have any plans that we can share at this point for higher level structures related to serverless on AWS?
We have some stuff that we can't share that I'm very excited about. But what we can share is that we are planning to go back and work on the serverless app repository support inside of the Terraform AWS provider. One of our engineers is planning to work on that. I'm particularly excited about that. He had been working on it before joining HashiCorp. And then when he joined the team, obviously jumped right into all of the things we already had prioritized. So we've now prioritized giving a little bit of time back so that he can finish up that work. It's definitely much wanted by our community, much wanted by our partners at AWS, and much wanted by us on the team. As far as other serverless stuff, we're pretty plugged into particularly the Lambda team and the folks working on Fargate. And so anything sort of coming down the pipe from those folks, we usually know about. And we do our best to try to support them as close to launch day as possible when they're launching larger new features.
And those heads up are definitely worth for us having, because it makes it easier to build the things that we want and to build the things that we need. So yeah, actually, when I start,
I think it's a good thing to bring up too, is just that, you know, we've been very lucky the last few months, I would say, to really start working together with a lot of the AWS service teams directly. So we set up regular cadence meetings with them so we can, you know, either know about higher priority issues or also find out about these things. So, you know, we're very appreciative of when we can work directly with the AWS folks as well.
I feel like there's room for a better together, you know, poster to be held up at this point, but it definitely works. When we are able to interface with a partner like that, the lines are a lot shorter and the releases are a lot faster. So on the topic of releases, the dark side is, of course, that sometimes there is an issue with a provider. When I have an issue report, what are some of the helpful things that I can include? What kind of information is most helpful to you to get to that and to find a resolution?
Yeah, sure. I can probably dive into that one unless Mary, you want to. Okay, cool. Yeah. So when we see issue reports, the biggest thing to help us is that, we have an issue template there for bug reports or feature requests. And usually those are pretty necessary just for understanding, either about your setup or your environment or what use cases you're trying to do if it's a feature request. And having those details up front makes it extremely easy for us to do what we call our triage process, which is basically just taking a look at things coming in and making sure that, if it's a bug, it's either well described enough so it could be reproduced, or if there is a reproduction case already created for it. And once we have that reproduction case, it actually makes it so much easier for us to go through and create, basically the test and the code fix for it. So yeah, having if it's a bug, having the reproduction cases and the configuration and that type of information is super important for the feature requests. Any references like links to AWS documentation, or just generalized use cases about certain functionality.
So more information is better.
Yes, we will never complain if there's a lot of information.
So one thing that I like to do to make sure my stuff keeps working is version pinning. And if you go to the registry, at this point, we actually give you the exact version string. So it only matches currently 3.7.0. So if you put that into your terraform.tf file, or in whatever you call your provider specification file, it will ensure that you're always using this version. So even 3-6 months down the road, you're still getting the same version. If you also pin your Terraform version, not just a provider version, you'll have code that keeps on working. It's my favorite code. So let's see what else we have in terms of questions. So considering it is a handful of people in the AWS provider team, how do you maintain that kind of velocity? And you briefly talked about this, but if we have 30 more seconds, then let's dive into this.
Well, yeah, I'll start talking about it, and then Brian can talk a little bit about, again, like what happens once it leaves me and Simon and goes to engineering. So Simon is our engineering manager. I will likely use his name. So basically things start out as either an issue or a request, again, from someone inside of the HashiCorp field team, or even inside of the organization. It might be another team using our product that needs something. So think of the requests as like all in a big bucket. We have stuff in GitHub, we have stuff in our internal tracking system. The first thing is like getting everything that can be in GitHub into GitHub. So as long as it's not something under NDA, either inside of HashiCorp or with AWS, we're making a GitHub issue for it. Then we look at sort of the overall like popularity of our GitHub issues. That's one of the signals that we use. So we say it in the top of our issue and PR templates, like if this is something that you need, please put a thumbs up on it. That's a really helpful signal for us to just kind of see like, where does this rank in the grand scheme of issues? Once we've taken a look at that, we sort of look at, okay, this is what we've prioritized on our roadmap as well. So our roadmap gets prioritized in the same way, but for the sake of this conversation, let's say the roadmap is already done. We'll look at our roadmap and say, okay, does this fit in with the themes that we've been having? Is it a bug? Is it a feature request? If it's a bug, how many people is it affecting? Is it a regression, or is it just sort of like a weird behavior that's causing a strange user experience? And is there a workaround or not? If there's no workaround, we're likely taking it on immediately. If there's a workaround and it's more of just sort of like a usability quirk, that might wait for a couple releases, or it might be something where we might recommend a different workaround for the time being, because actually changing the behavior would either cause a breaking change or worse usability in some cases. And we would rather recommend better usability than change something just to change something. As far as features go, those are usually ending up on the roadmap. Features in the provider tend to be a little bit larger, like new services. The things we look at for new services are, is this something that is desirable to our community? Is it in one of those areas that we're really trying to expand coverage in the provider? So the big areas, logging, compute, containers, all of that. And then, is it useful? Do we find it useful for our users and their workflows? So keeping in mind that, Brian and Simon and all of us spend a lot of time talking to all of you and our customers and understanding how you're using the provider day to day. And from all of that information, we try to plan both our releases and our roadmap in a way that includes new stuff, stuff we think will make the stuff that exists in the provider more useful, and then any fixes that we try to get in. So each week you should be seeing a mix of bug fixes, enhancements, and new features in the provider. And in that, we're also prioritizing the review of pull requests as well as doing weekly issue triage. And right now we have one of our engineers on sort of like a triage duty. So if you're seeing someone in the issues more often, and then the next week you're seeing a different person, we've implemented that rotation in our team so that issue triage is getting a more direct attention as opposed to all of us sort of taking in issues all the time. And then Brian, if I missed anything, please.
Yeah, no, you covered that really well from here's the general prioritization from a straight up, coding technical velocity of hey, can we merge more things in per week and that sort of perspective. That's where we start looking at, creating automated tooling for the coding. So there's a bunch of folks internally at HashiCorp that have worked on these projects to help either make the provider development experience either more streamlined or more straightforward and make the contributions a little bit easier. And you'll continue to see improvements in that regard. That's a huge area for us because we want to make it as simple as possible, or in better terms, just great development experience. And yeah, it's other than that, it is a little bit of we take a look at all the different prioritization things going on, and yeah, if pull requests look good with testing and documentation, it's that makes life so much easier for us, and that does increase our velocity. So I will say it is super helpful just even within the community to keep your eye out on things and comment on issues and that sort of thing. If you see a bug report and you maybe think you have a workaround or know something about it, it's super helpful to get that information in there. And even for pull request reviews and sort of things where it's oh yeah, it looks like you're maybe missing documentation. That's not to be anything negative towards anybody. We're all helping each other. And that's kind of what our team is here to help with, basically.
So you both mentioned workarounds. First of all, thank you for the expansive answer. This is a kind of content that I love hearing because it gives me an insight into what's happening and how things are happening. Mary, you mentioned workarounds. Brian, you did too. And you both mentioned that we sometimes recommend these workarounds. And so just reading between the lines here, how do I phrase this? I think the best way to think about this is if we recommend a workaround, it's probably because we have some insights into how this operates at scale, right? Which means it might not be the best looking workaround, but it's certainly grounded in other people using it as well. So it helps us if you use that, but do give us a feedback. We'll share Mary's Calendly link so you can grab some of her time. Let us know how the provider works for you, what doesn't work, and give us overall feedback. Or if you don't want to talk face-to-face, that's also cool. As both of you mentioned, voting on an issue really helps. It helps us gauge community interest. Doesn't guarantee that it will be merged in, because there's many more things that you two have to consider in the rest of the team, but it does help. So let's go back to our questions. Do we have any plans to share on the SSO API? And let me see. Things that we can manage around that resources.
So I could talk a little bit about our plans, and then Brian can talk a little bit about what to do. So as far as official plans go, no, I can't share any official plans about when we might release support for the SSO API. What I can share is that there is a bit of functionality that we are waiting on in the AWS Go SDK in order to support the SSO resources. This doesn't mean that the SSO resources aren't available in the upstream AWS API. It just means that we use the AWS Go SDK underneath the provider to interface with the API. And so we're waiting on a pull request. I think it's linked in the issues relating to SSO, but if it's not, I can grab the link and give it to Karim to share in the chat. But once that is complete, and we've been chatting with the AWS Go SDK team, we'll be able to expand the support for SSO. And then Brian can talk a little bit about what is and isn't supported and how you can use SSO today.
Yeah, so, there's actually two sides to the SSO conversation, which has actually been really confusing even, for folks who are just, kind of new to the AWS SSO kind of universe here. So single sign-on in this case, Amazon released support for it, where you could hook up to Azure AD or other, authentication providers via the console a few months ago. Some of those APIs were released about 2 months ago or a month ago, and a big chunk of them were actually released very recently. So, we're trying to figure out, how this all makes sense in the grand scheme of like Terraform, workflows and everything. But, in general, it's like what we would expect to see, especially because that issue is, pretty hot right now. There's a lot of upvotes and it's very new to us as well. So, I would expect to see that some of the maintainers, whether that's some of the HashiCorp engineers or other, major contributors to the provider will start keying in with like, hey, this is what we think maybe some of the resources will look like, based on the API documentation that we can see. And then it's, going to come down to, if the community rallies around implementing it before we do, that's perfectly fine. It's like, we just need to make sure that, we're fitting in all of our priorities along with everything else.
This is beautiful. We essentially covered the question in both ways and from all the interesting angles. One thing you also mentioned is we're waiting on some support. I have a feeling that if a company were to have a large event that lasts multiple weeks, towards the end of the year, that they would possibly release things around that time frame, but who knows? So one of our participants mentioned that they'd be up for contributing towards SSO. So I'm definitely expecting Tom Tucker to reach out to Mary and talk this through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you are super interested in contributing to a new service or a large service, feel free to schedule time with me and talk through it. I will likely bring Brian or Simon or one of the other engineers along, and we can talk about designing the service. We can talk about why you want or need the service. All of those things are totally cool to bring to me, and I love talking about them. So again, we shared my calendar link. Do not be shy. Feel free to book time. If we need to reschedule, we need to reschedule. But my day-to-day is spent talking to our users, and I really love to do it. And so the more of you that I hear from, the better.
Feedback is always a gift. Let's see what other questions we have at this point. We touched upon this a little bit, but what are some of the things that make PRs easier to review or make a decision on?
Yeah, I think from a general prioritization standpoint, if anything's on our roadmap, that's probably, very good candidate for being, reviewed a lot quicker. But, generally speaking, that's when the upvotes really matter. Hitting that thumbs up button on GitHub, really helps us decide, oh yeah, we definitely need to focus on certain things. There's also cases where it's, especially if it's like a really important bug fix, those we might actually like prioritize over, it might have not enough upvotes yet, but yeah, it's an important enough bug that we decided it's important to address, more immediately. But yeah, beyond that, is the quick answer is, the things we were mentioning earlier about testing and documentation.
And I think documentation always deserves a shout out because without it, we wouldn't know what resources are in there. I'm guessing most people don't go through the AWS subdirectory and look at all the resources that we have, all the data sources. So if you find that the documentation is missing something, absolutely send in a pull request for that. Those are great to have. They're an easy way of getting code contributions in, or, well, I guess documentation contributions, and they make the product better, not just for you, but for everyone.
Yeah, I actually have a fun little tidbit about documentation. You know, in the next few months, we'll probably be looking at, you know, enhancements that will either allow us to directly, you know, generate the documentation, or, you know, provide the documentation like at an attribute per attribute level within your code editors, for example. And this is kind of the stuff that happens, again, kind of behind the scenes, but, you know, it's something that, you know, HashiCorp itself is just really focused on, you know, is making sure that even as a, you know, person downloading the provider, it's like your code editor will have support, you know, at some point for actually seeing like, oh, if I'm putting, you know, VPC ID or something in, it'll actually have like a little description that pops up of like what that actually is. So pretty neat, like stuff that's coming down the pipe. You know, there's no definitive timelines yet for this provider, but, you know, there is a lot of work that's happening to enable this for smaller scale providers. And then once it's ready for prime time, you know, we'll get it into the AWS provider as well.
Yeah, so with 343 providers, I just looked it up in the registry. Having automated documentation generation certainly can help. And not just when you're building a provider, but also when you're actually using it. We've got the beautiful Visual Studio Code extension on one side for this. If you're more of an IntelliJ person, I know JetBrains also has a really good integration that helps you with writing better Terraform code, mostly because you might not know about certain attributes, and these extensions will tell you about them. They'll help you by auto-completing it. And you'll not have to wait until your plan or apply phase to figure out what was wrong. So I see a couple new people joining us on the live stream. Welcome. Always drop questions in the live chat if you have them. I feel like this is also a great place to put the like and subscribe, call out there. If you have an issue that you really like, you should definitely like it on GitHub. Leave a thumbs up. Don't leave a comment saying +1. We don't do this since 2018. And let us know what you think. And hit subscribe so you know when your infrastructure is ready for upgrading to the newest version and the fixed or added version of that resource.
Kareem, you just reminded me about how to know if an issue or pull request is going to be released. So if you see one of us on an issue chatting and you see us reviewing a pull request, generally speaking, in like 99% of cases, once that is added to a specific release milestone that is not a major release. So think of those as the .x releases. So we'll go with this week's. If you see something in the 3.8 milestone, it is almost 100% likely that that will be released in 3.8. If it is not, it will move out of that milestone into a new one. And that will be, the next week's or moved out. So if you see a release milestone on an issue that you're looking at or a pull request, you can pretty much count that as truth to know, okay, that's coming in this release. And again, a reminder, we release every Thursday. And so if it is in the release subsequent to the one that we're planning to put out, know that that will come in the next week rather than this week.
Yeah, Karim had also mentioned, liking and subscribing. One of the fun things that we get to do is like when we, actually do our releases, one of the steps that happens is that all of the issues that have the milestone will also get a comment too that say, hey, this has been released. So you don't even have to click refresh in Terraform registry or something if you're already, subscribed to these issues. GitHub will send you an email notification or a notification if, you're already subscribed to an issue you care about.
Or if you hate email, just get the GitHub iOS and Android app. Pretty sure they have an Android app. get a nice push notification that tells you your issue has been fixed. I love the predictability of the Thursday releases because my Friday mornings are generally spent quickly looking through a changelog and seeing which of my modules I can update. It's very nice. It makes it easy to plan your week. And we all know Friday is not the day you deploy anyway. So, you know, no reason not to update your code. And obviously we're kidding, because if you have infrastructure as code, you can actually deploy any day of the week. You also can without infrastructure as code, but Terraform definitely makes it easier to deploy predictably. So we've got a question from Ameya on if there's a possibility to integrate tflint and tfsec into main Terraform. And if you're just joining us, or if you've never heard of those tools, these are code quality tools that help you improve your code by telling you which rules you're breaking. If you've ever used any kind of linter like JSON-lint or CSS-lint or standard.js, they pretty much all do the same thing, which is hurt your feelings by telling you which of your code lines were not the quality they should be. But those are external things to Terraform. And I think we like having them external. Right, Brian?
Yeah, it's one of those fun things where you know, we try to design just Terraform in general to be interoperable with, you know, external programs. So there's things like JSON, Terraform plan output, and these sorts of things that are kind of there to help enable this ecosystem of tooling to be built around it. And that's great because it allows for these tools to flourish. You know, in this case, it's like, internally, HashiCorp, you know, may not have the resources to develop and have this functionality baked in, but the community has offered this and is extremely successful of being able to do certain things that, you know, we wouldn't be able to get to like instantly, basically. So it's super nice to see that ecosystem of tools that gets built around Terraform just in general.
The ecosystem is really one of the biggest things that attracted me to Terraform in the first place. Just knowing that it's a tool that's being used in production, not just by big companies, but by a lot of practitioners, by a lot of companies that contribute code back. It's just amazing. So we've got a question from Septem. I'm new to Terraform, so I don't exactly know what questions to ask. And that's the best part, right? Like when you're just discovering Terraform, there's so much you can do, especially if you're just getting started with a new cloud at the same time. Maybe that's the case for you, maybe it isn't. In any case, before we dive into the actual question, make sure you check out the Learn site, and we'll get a link for that up in a second, where we have a ton of tutorials that will make you have more fun with Terraform. But so to the question, do you have any suggestions for setting up autoscaling and ingress controllers prior to EKS deployments, besides additional scripts using local exec? And Brian, you mentioned EKS before.
Yeah, I can. I think we'd need a little bit more details about the setup here, but in general, you know, Terraform does have multiple providers in this case to help support these type of use case. So, you know, we have the AWS provider that we're talking about here that, you know, can help build these like auto scaling groups and EKS, you know, clusters and node groups and that sort of thing from the server standpoint. But then, you know, once Kubernetes is actually spun up and running, you know, that's when you start getting into the Terraform Kubernetes provider. And that has resources for all sorts of, you know, fun things in there, relating around deployments and configuration maps and all the fun stuff that Kubernetes has. So one thing that may trip up people at the very, very beginning of using Terraform is that if you're trying to spin up both the EKS cluster and Kubernetes all at the same time and configure it in the same configuration, Terraform might get a little confused because it might try to connect to that, you know, cluster thing that doesn't exist yet. So this is kind of where breaking up configurations just to be like, okay, here's the infrastructure side that manages my Kubernetes cluster. And then here's the other configuration that actually manages what's going on within Kubernetes itself. Having those kind of maybe be separated might also be super helpful. Not only, it helps you, kind of control your blast radius, I guess, as well, too. So, hey, I'm not going to have to worry about blowing away my security groups or something strange by doing a application deployment in my Kubernetes cluster. So, it's different ways to think about these sorts of things that sometimes helps as well. Just breaking up problems into littler pieces.
Breaking things up into little pieces to limit the blast radius is always good. My personal preference, rather than consuming Terraform state from other resources, is to just fall back to data sources, because that means I get to do upgrades per repository in the way that works for me. I might be running something on the latest and greatest version that isn't currently available on the registry, but most of my IAM stuff I like to keep on a released version, because screwing up IAM is not a good day, no matter if it's Friday or not. But yeah, it's when you build Terraform, when you're new to Terraform, think about building blocks. Think about which things you can build in a repeatable way, templatize them, and go from there. And so quickly going back to what you can do with EKS, there's a couple more things that you have options to. We've got the Kubernetes provider for Terraform, which allows you to interact with Kubernetes resources. You can set up cluster roles, deployments, a few more things. We'll get a link for that in the chat as well. It's probably the most link-heavy chat that we've had in a while, but hopefully that's helpful. And try out the Kubernetes provider for this. And then on the other side, we also have the Kubernetes operator, which I don't have a link to right now. But while it is a bit nuanced, you can use those two options to carry out EKS operations without falling back to local exec and using the AWS CLI. So next community question. Oh, and Septem, if this answers your question, that's great. If it doesn't, let us know. I think we have an office hours coming up on the Kubernetes ecosystem, including Helm and more next week, hosted by my colleague Taylor, which is super exciting. And we've got a couple minutes left, so this is a perfect question for that. I'm planning to upgrade Terraform, currently using Terraform 0.11. Which would be the most stable version?
Cool. So if you are still on Terraform 0.11, Terraform versions 2.70 is going to be your last version in the AWS provider that you can use Terraform 0.11 with. Since Terraform 0.11 has been released, the Terraform team has released Terraform 0.12 last year, the year before, time. Wow. And then this year, more recently, has released Terraform 0.13, and there are 2 or 3 releases into the Terraform 0.13 series. Our recommendation is to go to Terraform 0.12 first, check it out, make sure Terraform 0.12 is a larger release. It makes use of HCL2. It has some larger changes in Terraform. Make sure all of that works. Do it in, again, a sandbox environment or a testing environment first. Make sure Terraform 0.12 works. Once you've checked that out, got used to all of the changes in the language itself, then go ahead, upgrade to Terraform 0.13. In .13, you're getting access to module for each and count and a bunch of useful new features for both providers and modules. And then Brian, if you want to talk about any like weird technical stuff that you might get into in upgrades, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Terraform 0.12 was pretty large release. There was some syntax changes that did occur, not necessarily required, but some things were deprecated. And that's kind of like the biggest kind of hurdle to the 0.12 release, is just going through the configuration changes. There is a whole guide, an upgrade guide that's present in the Terraform.io documentation about upgrading to 0.12. Basically, going on the latest version of 0.11, there's like a checklist command, I believe, and then you make sure it applies cleanly one last time, upgrade it, and then there's a whole set of documentation there. I don't want to read it out loud, but yeah. And then once you're thinking about, okay, yeah, like let me just go to 0.13, a lot simpler. So there's no like crazy syntax changes. There's a little bit of changes around the Terraform configuration block, which is how you tell Terraform where to download providers from. So that's a little bit new, and that's been related to all this Terraform registry work that's been happening. But for the most part, again, kind of there's an upgrade guide that's listed on the Terraform website that shows you, basically runs through the steps that you need to upgrade from 0.12 to 0.13. But should be a lot simpler than it was for 0.12.
0.12 to 13 was indeed a lot easier. And I love that even for 13, just running the upgrade command and getting the feedback I needed on how to update my registry configuration was super simple. So let's see, we've got 2 minutes left, which means housekeeping stuff. No, that's not as exciting, but yes, we plan on having office hours around the DigitalOcean provider as well. We have them currently sort of scheduled for sometime end of November, but not the Thanksgiving Thursday, because you should be spending time with your family. And if you don't celebrate Thanksgiving, that's also cool. You should still spend time with your family. So that's November 19th. If I'm not fully, I'm having trouble with calendars today, so I might be a day off. I think the easiest way to deal with this is to just come back every Thursday and check out the live stream. We've got the Kubernetes and Helm providers and operator next week, and we've got more content coming up every week. Let us know which providers you want to see. We had the registry last week, core 2 weeks ago. Think of this as your behind the scenes look at how Terraform works, not just from a code perspective, but also get to meet the people that build it and ask them questions, which I think is a ton of fun. And based on the questions we're getting, I think y'all like this too. If you can't make the time slot, I mean, right now we're all hailing from different cities, 2 different continents. We record these, we put them live later, so you can always follow along. And if for whatever reason you couldn't attend live and you miss out on live chat, go to discuss.hashicorp.com and ask your questions there. One of us might respond, but if not, there's plenty of practitioners that take the time to go in depth and help you find the answer that you need. So Brian, Mary, any closing words for our community?
No, I'm just excited, to see all of y'all. It's really great to be able to spend this time answering questions, hearing about what's important. Again, feel free to schedule time with me. The link to my calendar is in my GitHub profile. And I think also in the chat somewhere, so scroll back to find it, but that is what I love to spend time doing. So again, feel free to schedule time with me. It's been great to be here to answer questions, and then I'll let Brian take it away.
Yeah, one of the best things about these community office hours is getting feedback and getting these questions to, further understand, we're all humans involved with this, so it is fun to hear about use cases, learn about use cases. And, from, on my perspective day to day, it's really good to just see the community at work, and it's great. Having people contributing, either via issue comments or pull requests for reviews and these sorts of things. It's all everybody helping everybody. So it is really exciting to just see everybody kind of coming together and to make this successful. It's not just our team, it's everybody.
It takes a village to build this product, and it's amazing getting to meet so many of you. If you're curious about what's next for Terraform, what's next for HashiCorp, make sure to register for HashiConf Digital. happening October 12th through 15th. I know we've got some really amazing stuff coming up that we can't wait to show you. And with that, we're at the end of today's session. If you have any questions, make sure to drop them in the Slido link, post them on our forums, and we'll see you next week. Have a great day, everyone.